Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue our journey with Colt and Larissa on 90 Day Fiancé. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
Hope you guys are hungry.
Yeah. Can't wait to see this place.
Yeah. It's gonna be awesome.
I'm annoyed because I spent 2 hours doing my makeup and he doesn't see it. My future husband, he should to compliment me every time that I look nice.
All right, she said this before, and I'll just say there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with someone saying, my love language, if you will, is when I do myself up that you compliment me. That's a big deal to me. And she has asked Colt to do that. Now, there's also nothing wrong with Colt being like, wow, that's not really how I'm oriented. I don't do that kind of stuff. I'm going to have to drum it up from some other place. I'm going to have to, have a checklist and remind myself. So on his point of view, I could see his point of view as well. I would hope that the two of them could work this out and not have it start off on a bad note for the night. Now, for most people, I would imagine in Larissa's position, they'd be like, well, I know he loves me and I know he thinks I'm pretty. And, I'm not going to drive this evening down the tubes because he didn't compliment me in my makeup. But we'll see what happens.
I would like to ask you, Andrew, something.
Sure.
All American men, they don't give compliments to women.
Yikes. So, as you know, I always talk about triangulation, so this is a triangulation. There's a conflict between Colt and Larissa is now involving Andrew through this passive-aggressive question. It's passive-aggressive because Larissa has anger and hostility towards Colt, and instead of just communicating that directly in a direct, overt, explicit way, it's implicit and hidden by asking this question of the friend. So I'm really trying to understand why these two like each other. I see almost no goodwill between the two of them. No benefit of the doubt. What is the benefit of this relationship to these two? I mean, right from the bat, she's like, okay, I did myself up. I'm going to hope that he gives me a compliment. He didn't give me a compliment. I'm going to roll my eyes, and now I'm going to start a fight while his friends are in the car. This is just, it's really quite something.
Like, oh, you look so good today. I love your lipstick. I never use it. Never?
No, I say nice things too.
What are you trying to tell me, honey bunny?
Coach, don't talk to me.
I've told you many...
And you want sex 24 hours. You don't give me any compliment.
I've given you a compliment to say you look beautiful.
And you
I
want
love
sex. How you turn me on if you don't give me compliments?
I say you look...
All right, so there's, again, nothing wrong with Larissa saying, look, you're always asking me for sex, and I'm always asking you to compliment me. How about we both give each other what we want, and we both win, and our relationship is enhanced? I've had those kinds of conversations with couples before. It's not great to get in that kind of quid pro quo, if you will, but it's not a bad way of asking for things. I request, can you please compliment me more? But the way she's going about it through this passive aggression is really hostile, destructive, unhelpful, embarrassing. I can't imagine this working out. It's just such a train wreck. With other couples, at least they would return, at least for a time, of levity, of niceness or something. And my cat is agreeing with me.
Darling, I love you. I think you look beautiful.
Come on. Stop it.
Coach doesn't compliment me. A real man shouldn't act like this.
Let's go eat.
So that might be another perceptual lens that she developed early in life as a result of repeated experience where she's 2, 3, 4 years old and someone is not being nice to her enough in a real way. They're not paying attention to her. They're not noticing her. They're abandoning her. They're maybe even abusing her or something like that. These kinds of things happen to kids, as we all know, and some of you have even been through this. there are a number of different coping mechanisms that kids will develop in response to that very difficult situation. For some kids, the coping mechanism they will develop, among maybe others, one of the coping mechanisms is to really demand that they get attention. I demand that you give me attention. Why? Because if they don't demand, they will get no attention. So they're 3 years old, 4 years old, they're being almost completely neglected emotionally. And they learn that if they're going to get their needs met, they have to demand it. And they have to become very noticeable. They have to alert their emotions. They have to, prod people. They have to say, I deserve it. They have to cry at the drop of a hat. They got to become very noticeable with their emotions, noticeable with who they are. They have to be loud with their voice. And you can imagine at the age 2, 3, and 4, your neurons are developing, your personality is developing, your orientation towards the world is developing, your perception, the way you see the world is developing. And for some kids, they will just basically assume that all the time they're not getting enough attention because they usually aren't getting enough attention. And so if they assume they're not getting enough attention, then they will demand the attention because they're usually not getting their attention. And if they demand it, they do get some attention. And then we go into adult life and we retain that schema. We retain that way of looking at the world. I'm going to assume, because it's always been true, that people are not paying enough attention to me. And I have to demand it and accuse people that they're not giving me attention because it's the only way that I'm going to get a little bit of attention. It's not a conscious decision, you understand. This is something that's developed in your neurons, in the way that you see the world when you're very young. And of course, brain scientists would have a different way of putting this, but I'm not a brain scientist, so I'm putting it in my layman's terms. So that might explain why she is getting ready and she really is looking for that attention. He gives her some of that attention, but not enough. She gets very hurt. So why would you be very hurt? Well, because when you were very young, you weren't getting hardly any attention. And so the first sign of a little bit of non-attention, then you feel very bad about yourself. I am speculating 100% about Larissa. I'd have to ask her if any of this made sense to her. I have no idea. So this is similar to other kinds of traumas. So imagine you go to war and there's a gunfight and there are people dying and there's a helicopter and there's gunfire and there's explosions and there's dust in your eyes and there's certain stimuli that are associated with the trauma and the death and the fear and the intense terror that you're going through. Then a year later, you're not in the theater of war anymore and you hear a helicopter, you hear a loud noise, the dust is in your face, and suddenly you're transported back to that trauma and you are triggered and your distress goes through the roof. And your solution is to get a gun and to hide in the closet and to make sure you radio back to HQ or whatever it is. And the reason why you're stateside and you're in the closet with your gun and you're paranoid and you're sweating is because you saw the similar markers of the trauma that you had in the past. Well, if you're being abused and if you're being abandoned and someone is not paying attention to you because they weren't paying attention to you in the past, that can actually trigger that complex trauma. He did not compliment me. Therefore, I'm triggered that all those traumas of being ignored and not getting any attention, maybe being abandoned. I have heard horrific behavior from parents, literally leaving kids, young kids on the curb saying, "You're not a good girl and I don't want to see you anymore." In a game, and then they drive away and in an hour they come back and say, "Okay, that was a lesson because we want you to learn to behave yourself." I've heard of stuff like that before and worse. So a lot of kids can go through some really horrific things. And so if you're traumatized and the problem was lack of attention or abandonment or something, then a little bit of a lack of attention, which to someone else might hurt them on a scale from 1 to 10, like a 2 or a 1.5, might be like, "Oh, I always tell him to compliment me and he didn't compliment me. It kind of hurts my feelings." If you've been traumatized along those lines, you'll go from 0 to 9 within a half a second. You're devastated. You're back at war. You're back in the theater of war. The bullets are flying by you, and you're terrified, and you're hurt, and you don't know what's happening, and you're desperate, and you feel horrible. I don't know about her, but I wouldn't be surprised if when he didn't compliment her, it wasn't just an intellectual thing, like, I told him to compliment me. I would speculate, I'd have to ask her, that when that didn't happen, she felt awful. Just awful. And her hurt feelings get transformed into anger, rolling her eyes, triangulation, passive aggression, punishing him, because she feels justified because of the amount of hurt she feels, because of the amount of trauma that she went through. I've seen this a lot. In fact, it's my specialty. I treat people with these kinds of conditions because they're very confusing to clients, because they're often very confusing to therapists, because the client doesn't necessarily have insight into why they do what they do. I've treated people with the condition that I'm describing, and they exhibit her kind of behavior. I don't know, of course, if this applies to Larissa, but I have treated people like this. And it takes a understanding of personality. It takes an understanding of complex trauma. It takes an understanding of defense mechanisms. It takes an understanding of repetition compulsion and a lot of psychodynamic things. But when you can see it, then it all makes sense. And I wonder if that's the case for Larissa. I don't know. Maybe we'll get some more data as we move forward.
It's ridiculous.
I think Larissa's a fiery spark. It's really awkward, and it's like, oh goodness, what do we do?
I think both of us just kind of want to let things work themselves out.
Can we have a good dinner without fighting?
I'm really upset. I spent 2 hours to get ready. I was putting, I know that Colt won't say anything.
So let's look at the net effect of her defense mechanism. The attention is all on her right now. All three of these quiet people are paying attention to her. She even looks like she's kind of on stage. So her efforts to get safe is putting her on stage. That if she's going to get attention, she might as well get negative attention. So I'm guessing that when she's not getting attention, this would be something I would want to ask her. I'd have to ask her. When she's not getting attention frequently, then it feels like she's falling off a cliff. And I want to be clear about that people that have these kinds of conditions, again, it's not just an intellectual thing like, I like attention. It is a cliff of a dark abyss, a horribleness. Trauma is on the other side of that cliff, distress, being completely alone and abandoned and left behind. And unless I'm getting constant attention or very frequent attention, very frequent evidence of high attention, then I will be very afraid I'm going to fall off that cliff. And I need a constant supply of those little indications of attention to make me feel safe. And if I don't get that, I feel very afraid and I feel very hurt. But because I was treated badly growing up, I don't trust people with those feelings to the point where I might not even notice those feelings, because it's like, why notice that hurt and those distress markers, because no one cares about them anyway. I might as well just only consciously understand my anger and express that, because no one else cares about anything else anyway. And I've helped a lot of people like this. I don't know if this is the case for Larissa, but I've helped people like the way I'm describing, where I help them to recognize their hurt and their fears, which are vast, and validating that so they can actually feel safe enough to feel those feelings themselves and get some corrective experiences from me, begin to trust other human beings in our relationship, and then thus trust other people. I wonder if that's the case for Larissa. She's certainly starting to show that condition, but I have no idea. I'm guessing, though, if we have at least 2 seasons of her, that maybe we'll get a lot of data along these lines. Maybe this will be a learning experience for us all. Let's continue watching.
It's not one time, 2 times, every time, you know? You know who I'm talking about.
Well, I'll refer to my list of compliments that are approved by you.
No, you haven't given me true
I
compliments.
do give you true compliments.
You know that's not true. It's not true.
It is true.
No, it's not true.
Walk in my shoes. I work all day.
I don't care.
So this is more data in the column of the condition. What label do I want to put to it? I'm going to try to avoid clinical language because frankly, the clinical labels that I could apply here are not well written about on the internet. In fact, I would venture to say 99.999% of what I'm talking about on the internet is not written accurately. So I'm going to stick to the language that I'm saying, which I often will even hold in my head anyway. I mean, who cares about the labels? It's really about the description. And so we're seeing some evidence that from her, she desperately wants those kinds of compliments. She seems really hurt, and she's accusing him now, because I think she's flooded with negative emotion, that all of your compliments, none of them are real. And I'm guessing that for her, it's because she is frequently walking around in a state of suffering and negativity. And every once in a while, there's a little bit of an indication that she's safe and that she's good enough and that someone is paying attention to her. But it's never enough, because the hole in her soul is so deep because of it was, she didn't have her needs fulfilled when she was younger. Think about it like from the time you're born until you're 5 years old. Let's say you need 100% of your container filled with attention. And you always need a little bit of it. So there's always a little bit of a spigot coming out. The water's coming down. You need a little bit more attention. But you need a lot of attention from 0 to 5, a lot of attention. And so let's say that you're already at like a 10% attention receiving need by the time you're 5 years old. And there's a little leak always, it's always leaking out. And every time there's a little bit of a drop of attention that you're given, it feels kind of good, but you still notice this vast emptiness of this need. And it's just like, yeah, sure, you compliment me, but it doesn't feel like it's enough. It never feels like it's enough because the trauma and the deficit was so great growing up that it never does feel like enough. But of course, from Colt's point of view, and we don't know, maybe he is restrictive in his compliments to her. But we've seen him compliment her on the show. But anyway, let's assume for the sake of argument that he does at least give enough compliments that most people would be satisfied with that. From his point of view, he's just like, I do compliment you and I do mean them. I don't understand what's happening right now. And this is where a therapist could help out, but I'm sure that's not going to happen. Let's continue watching.
You've been getting ready. It's been 2 hours to get ready.
Care. Okay, this is what Colt's doing. Works all day, has to deal with other problems with his family, has to worry about a wedding and all this crap, and to make sure that you're happy. When does Colt get upset? When does Colt get angry? What does Colt want? It's always about you.
Okay, so again, I would slow him down. I'd be like, okay, Colt, so what you're saying right now is you feel like you have feelings and you want her to pay attention to you. Nothing wrong with that. Let's both pay attention to each other's needs. I would help first, because I think Larissa is the most escalated right now. I would help Colt say, okay, Colt, what do you think Larissa is trying to tell you right now? And a lot of times people in this position will say, like, well, I don't know, she just seems crazy right now. Okay, but, think about the words she's saying. What do you think she is trying to communicate to you? Eventually, Colt might say something like, well, I think she's saying she wants me to, compliment her more, but I do compliment. Okay, so that's what you're hearing what she's saying, is that she wants you to compliment her more. Is that what you think she's saying? Yeah, I guess that's what she's saying. Okay. Communicate to Larissa that you understand that you don't have to say you're wrong. Just say you understand. That's always the first step. And people out there, if you can learn one thing from anything I ever say, if you want to stop a conflict, one of the best things you can do is say, okay, what is this person trying to tell me? How can I tell them I hear them? Because a lot of times you're not really hearing, you're not really listening. And if you are, you're not telling the other person that you're really hearing them. 95% of conflicts can be eliminated just by that, particularly early intervention. And so Colt could say something like, okay, honey, what I'm hearing you say is that you're hurt that I didn't compliment you earlier. Is that what you're saying? And she would say, yes, that's what I'm saying. Okay, thank you for telling me. Now let me tell you how I feel about things. I feel like you don't recognize when I compliment you. And then Larissa would be defensive, and I would say, okay, Larissa, slow down. What is he telling you? Think about what he's telling you and really slow down, be differentiated. Don't have a knee-jerk emotional reaction and communicate back to him what he's saying. This can take a while too. Sometimes this takes literally weeks with couples. What I'm saying right now, they're so defended, they're so flooded, it takes a long time. Sometimes it's right away, but anyway. So it asks, Larissa, what is he saying? Okay, well, what he's saying is that he does compliment me sometimes, but Kirk, he doesn't compliment me. Okay, I hear that, but let's just stick one step at a time. You are saying that he's saying what? Well, Colt is saying that he compliments me, and that he's telling me that they're real. Okay, so you don't have to agree with that, Larissa. Colt, is that what you're trying to say? And Colt would say, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. That almost always de-escalates things. Now they can start to communicate. Now they can start to believe in each other. Now they can start to work things out. But instead, what they're doing is they're just attacking each other, which they've always done, which I can't imagine changing, and I can only imagine it's just going to spin out of control and get worse over time. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.